Hello everyone, welcome to our YouTube channel, and today we are going to learn about skull sutures. So in the previous lecture I have already given an idea about the sutures, about the skull sutures. So in the previous lecture we have already covered the different bones of the skull which is present on your skull. So basically in the skull you have two categories of bone, the cranial bones or cranium and facial bones. So these make your whole skull. Apart from that, now coming to the skull sutures. So skull sutures are nothing but the joints where two different cranial bones join together. As I already said that the skull is a collection of bones. I mean, it consists many bones. It consists around 22 bones, right? We have already studied this. We already know that skull has 22 bones. So these 22 bones joined together to make the skull. So these joints are nothing but sutures. Here you can say, see, this is the suture. What is this? This is suture. So here you can see the boundaries where the two bones are joining together. So these boundaries are nothing but sutures. Okay, so let's see more information about sutures. What are these, and what are the different types of sutures we have in our skull? So let's see the definition of sutures. A suture is a line or junction of articulation between the skull's adjacent bone. So what is sutures? If you want to define sutures, so sutures is nothing but the line or junctions. Here you can see these lines are sutures. These lines are sutures. So these lines are sutures. So these are lines or junction of articulation between skull's adjacent bone. So this is parietal bone. This is, for example, this is left parietal bone and this is right parietal bone. Okay, so these two bones are joining together with a suture. So this is the articulation between two different skull bones. So this is suture. Okay, a suture is a fibrous joint. So it's a type of joint. Which type of joint? It's a type. It's a fibrous joint. Okay, these joints are fibrous joints which fuse together by Sharpie's fiber. These are fused together by which fibers? Sharpie's fibers. So these bones or these skull bones are joined together by Sharpie's fibers, and it is the Sharpie's fibers which allow a bit of flexibility. So these fibers allow flexibility on it, I mean on the bones. So we have a bit of flexibility on our skull bone because of these fibers. Okay, the skull looks a lot like a single large bone, as I just said that it looks like a single bone, but it's not a single bone, it's the collection of bones. But in reality, it consists several bones. How many bones? It consists all over 22 bones in uh, seven extra bone. You cannot say extra bone, but these are additional bones, right? Right, like ear ossicles and your hyoid, including your hyoid bone. Okay, so 22, the 22 is the number for your skull bones, including your facial bones and cranial bones. These bones connect together to make the skull. The bones are frontal. Okay, these bones are like frontal bones, parietal bones, and occipital bones, and all these bones we have studied in the previous lecture. If you haven't seen that lecture, please go to the playlist and check that video out so that you can get more familiar about the frontal bone, parietal bone, occipital bone, these bones. Okay, so go check that video out. So these are the skull bones. These are the cranial bones. So at the birth, now let's talk about at the time of birth. So at the time of birth, it has total 45 skull bones. Okay, the skull suture is also called cranial suture. So at the time of birth, skull has 45 suture, and after that, moving to adolescent, it fuses and becomes 22 bones. Okay, so a skull suture is called cranial suture also. So skull suture is also known as or also called as cranial suture because it's present on the cranium. The skull is a vital structure as it encloses one of the most important organs in the body, and that is brain. So it's really very important. The skull is really very important because it gives the protection to your most important organ, and that is brain. Okay, the infant skulls differ from that of the adult skull. Of course, yes, an infant skull is different from the adult skull. Why? Because it has 45 bones and an adult skull have 22 bones, right? So that's why an infant skull is different than the adult skull, because it consists different bones. Here you can say it consists 6 separate bones. Again, the name is frontal, occipital, temporal, parietal. These bones are there in the skull. So we'll see one more important difference between the infant skull and adult skull, okay, in the later slides, I mean in the next slide. So this is the thing, an infant skull is different from the adult skull. Next, let's talk about the different sutures which are there in the skull. So the primary suture, let's categorize different sutures like primary bones, primary sutures and the other sutures. Like, so primary sutures are coronal sutures. These are, so first coronal suture, second sagittal suture, then squamous suture, and then lambdoidal suture. So we have these four primary suture. First is coronal suture, sagittal suture, squamous suture, and lambdoidal suture. Let's see the location of these sutures. So let's talk about coronal suture first. What are coronal sutures? So coronal suture is located between the frontal bone. So what is the location of coronal suture? So it is located between the frontal bone and two parietal bone. So in the frontal bone and two parietal bone. So this suture is coronal suture. So this is your frontal bone, this is your frontal bone, and this is your parietal. So suture between them is coronal suture. So this suture is coronal suture. Its location is in between frontal bone and parietal bone, and its function is to join frontal bone to parietal bone. It covers frontal frontale in an infant. What is frontal frontale? So this is the important thing I was talking about, that the difference between an infant skull and an adult skull. So coronal sutures cover frontal frontale in an infant. So let's see the frontal frontale first. So this is the thing. In infant you have anterior frontale, the soft spot you can say, and the posterior frontale. So interior frontale is the junction where parietal and frontal bone meets. Where parietal and frontal bone meet. This is your anterior frontale. This thing here, the spaces between the skull bone in an infant, these frontales are the spaces between skull bones in an infant. This is the important thing. It is only present in the baby skull, in an infant skull, where the suture intersect and called frontalis. They are covered with the strong membrane. These structures are covered with the strong membrane which protects the brain. So it is for the protection of brain, and then and the underlying soft tissue. So the babies have the softest skull, because whenever you have a small baby in your house, what are parents say? Okay, hold their head properly, because they are not able to manage its weight, and they are not able to manage their own head by them. So because the skull is really very soft and tissues are really very soft, the bones are not completely ossified, the sutures are not strong enough. Okay, the frontalis are divided into two, as I said. First is anterior frontale, and then you have posterior frontale. So anterior frontale is the junction between parietal bone and frontal bone. Okay, where the two parietal bone meet. So this is your first parietal bone, this is your second parietal bone, and it's joining your frontal bone. So the space between them is known as anterior frontale, or you can say that it's the soft spot. It remains soft until the child reaches 18 months. So it will remain soft until that baby reaches 18 months or 2 years old. Okay, so from 18 months to 2 years, it remains soft. Now coming to the posterior frontale, it is the junction between the occipital bone and parietal bone. The occipital bone and parietal bone. So you can say the parietal bone is the middle bone. Okay, so when parietal bones joins the frontal bone, it's anterior frontale, and when parietal bone joins the posterior, the occipital bone, it is known as posterior frontale. Here you can see this junction is your posterior frontale. It closes during first few months of baby's life. So this frontale closes between first few months of that baby's life. So this is important in case of an infant skull, and it's not present in an adult skull. These frontales are not present in the adult skull because over the time, while reaching the adolescent life, it gets closes completely. I mean, it gets fused completely. Now again coming to the coronal suture is completed. Okay, now coming to the sagittal suture. So where sagittal suture is? So it is located between two parietal bones. So this is your sagittal suture. This is your sagittal suture. Excuse me. So this is your sagittal suture, and this view is from the superior part. So this is superior view of the skull. So this middle joined line is sagittal suture, which connects two parietal bones. Okay, it connects two parietal bone together. So sagittal suture is clear, coronal suture is clear. Now coming to the squamous suture or squamosal suture or squamoparietal suture. So its name is squamous suture, squamosal suture, squamoparietal suture. Okay, its location is between the squamous area of the temporal bone. So let's see the temporal bone and parietal bone, and these bones connecting the parietal bones to the temporal bone. So this squamous suture connects your parietal bone to the temporal bone. So this is your parietal bone, and in this diagram you are not able to see the temporal bone. So let's move to the other structure where you can see the temporal bone. Yes, so this is your parietal bone. This is your parietal bone and this is your temporal bone, and this structure between them is your squamosal suture. This is your squamosal suture which connects your parietal bone to the temporal bone. Okay. Now lambdoidal suture. Squamosal suture is clear. This is the primary suture. These sutures are primary sutures. Then lambdoidal suture. So lambdoidal suture is present in the occipital bone. So it is the area between occipital bone and two parietal bone. So it joins your occipital bone to the parietal bones. It connects the parietal bone to the occipital bone. It connects the parietal bone to the occipital. So this is your occipital bone and this is your parietal bone. So your suture is here. Your suture, this lambdoidal suture, this is your lambdoidal suture. This is your lambdoidal suture. This is your lambdoidal suture. Okay, which connects your occipital bone to temporal bone. Clear? If I try to make temporal bone here, so I'll make suture like this, and this is this is occipital bone, and it's connecting your parietal bone to the occipital bone, and this suture is nothing but lambdoidal suture. So lambdoidal suture is located between the parietal suture and occipital bone, parietal bone to the occipital bone, and the suture is known as lambdoidal suture. Clear? Now metopic suture. Where metopic suture is present, or what is the location of metopic suture? So it runs midline of the frontal bone. So its location is in the frontal bone and fuses between 3 months to 9 months. It fuses between 3 months to 9 months. This metopic suture is somewhere there. This suture is metopic suture because it's present in the frontal bone. It's somewhere there in the frontal bone, in the middle of the bone. So that is metopic suture. It's present. This suture is run between the frontal bone. In your frontal bone, it's the middle one which is present in your frontal bone, and it fuses between 3 to 9 months of age. Okay. Now frontal sphenoid bone. Frontal sphenoid bone. So as the name suggests, it is present on the frontal bone and it's connected with your sphenoid bone. It usually closes at the age of 3 months. 3 months. It closes in the 3 months. Now let's see the location of frontal sphenoid. So it is located at sphenoid bone. This is your sphenoid bone, and it's present the connection between frontal and sphenoid bone. So this is your frontal bone, this is your sphenoid bone. So this suture is your frontal sphenoid. Now coming to the sphenoparietal suture. So sphenoparietal suture is the tiny suture which separate your parietal bone to the sphenoid bone. So this is again the small tiny suture which separates your parietal bone to the sphenoid bone. Now coming to the sphenoid bone and temporal bone, this is this small bone. This small suture is your sphenoparietal. This is your sphenoparietal suture. Okay, this is the location of your sphenoparietal. I'll change the color for sphenoparietal so that you guys can locate this one. This is the small suture which separates your sphenoid bone to the temporal bone. So this is your parietal, it separates parietal bone to sphenoid bone. So this is the separation line between this is parietal bone and this is sphenoid bone. So this is the suture which is sphenoparietal suture. Okay, next spheno-squamous suture. So where this spheno-squamous suture is, so it separate your squamous portion to the temporal bone. So it separates your squamous area, your squamous suture. Now coming to the squamous suture, it separate your parietal bone to the temporal bone. So here it is present in the it is between the parietal and temporal. So this is spheno-squamous suture. So it's in the sphenoid bone. So this is your sphenoid bone and this is your temporal and sphenoid. So this is your this one is your spheno-squamous suture. So it is the separation between sphenoid bone and temporal bone. Okay. Now, parieto-mastoid suture. Parieto-mastoid suture separate your parietal bone and temporal bone. So this is your parietal bone. This is your parietal bone and this is your temporal bone. So it separate your parietal bone from temporal bone from mastoid process. So from mastoid process. So it separate your parietal bone from temporal bone from the area of your mastoid process. Okay, you're able to see the parieto-mastoid suture when you see the image of from here. If you see the skull from downside, you will be able to locate parieto-mastoid suture. Now occipito-mastoid suture, it separate mastoid process to occipital bone. Again, it's here somewhere. It separate occipital bone to the mastoid process. Okay. Next, we have already discussed that. And then function of suture. Why sutures are present in your skull? What are the functions which sutures facilitate? So first and most important work of these sutures are that the suture function is an expansion of joint. It expands the joints which allow the bones to move during birth process. So during birth process, these bones rearrange themselves to make to facilitate the childbirth, because the birth canal is really very narrow. So because of that, these sutures facilitate the rearrangement of skull bones so that the birth process can happen. It allows head of the newborn to deform so that it can fit through the birth canal and it can pass through the birth canal. Okay, as the brain grows over the time or the period of time, grows and the skull expands, leading to symmetrical shape of the head. So because of, as I said, that expansion, they facilitate expansion. Suture help to expand the skull over the period of time. As the brain grows, the sutures will expand, the skull becomes big. So it facilitates that process. And again, another function is the abnormal shape of the head happens if any suture prematurely closes. If any suture closes prematurely, it makes an abnormal shape of the skull and they hinder the growth of particular area of the skull, and that will disturb the growth of that particular area of skull. So that's why it's really very important that sutures closes at its right time. So every bone or every area of the skull has some time, like for example after a few years or after a few months, they close, they fuse, and they make the proper structure of the skull. In adults, the suture enables impact force to be evenly distributed around the skull. So again, an important work of the suture, that it distribute the force of impact. So if you have any injury in your skull, if you in your head, so the suture will distribute that impact evenly so that your brain be safe. So that is the main process, that is the important work of the skull, that it protects your brain. So if you are having any impact in your head, so that impact is evenly distributed on your skull with the help of these sutures will absorb the impact, a kind of, I mean, it's kind of absorption, you can say. I'm just saying this word just to you know, make you understand what happens. So if any impact, you have any impact in your head, so that force is evenly distributed over the skull or around the skull so that your brain be safe. So these are the important sutures. These are the primary sutures and other sutures which are present in the human skull. So if you have any doubt, you can drop the comment. I will address that doubt. If you like this video, you can give a thumbs up. If you like this channel, you can subscribe this channel. And important thing is that you can join us in the Telegram group, and we have our official app also. So for the app, you can get the link in the description, and for the Telegram, if you want to join the Telegram channel, you will get the link there in the description box. So everything is there in the description box. You can go there and you can check these things out. And have a great day ahead. See you in the next class. We'll try to cover more and more such topics in upcoming lectures. So have a great day ahead again, and thank you so much for watching this video. See you in the next lecture. Bye.